Hey everyone, welcome to This Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because, well, we're tackling a really fascinating psychological paradox. Have you ever considered that the very act of believing you're already smart enough might actually be the biggest red flag that you aren't? I know, it sounds totally counterintuitive, right? But psychology shows us that true intelligence isn't just about accumulating facts or showing off what you know. It's fundamentally reflected in how you think, how you respond to new information, and critically, how willing you are to question yourself. Today, we're mapping out the psychology of the mind, using some fun visual storytelling to do it, to reveal the 5 hidden traps that prove you might not be quite as smart as you think.
So I want to start by asking you a really direct question. Are you as smart as you think? Now, I want you to lower your defenses for a second. This isn't about making anyone feel bad, not at all. Rather, let's frame the psychology we're about to explore as a sort of diagnostic journey. It's a roadmap of the mind that we can all learn from. Because as our sources point out, if you're highly intelligent, you actually tend to doubt your own conclusions. If you rarely question yourself, well, you're probably missing something critical.
Okay, let's dive right into traps 1 and 2. Overconfidence and rigid thinking. These first two psychological signs are heavily intertwined. Basically, they represent those mental roadblocks where people absolutely refuse to doubt their own conclusions or outright refuse to update their beliefs when the world around them changes.
This is the overconfidence bias. Notice our little stick figure here, standing so proudly, yet they are completely isolated on this microscopic box of knowledge floating in a vast, empty space. It's a fascinating phenomenon, really, where a limited understanding of a topic actually creates this powerful illusion of clarity. People with lower cognitive flexibility often feel absolutely certain about almost everything. They stand on their tiny little box and declare, "I can see the whole world." But that lack of self-doubt, it's a massive trap. And that leads us straight into the second sign, avoiding changing your mind. Look, changing opinions isn't a weakness. It's literally intelligence in action. Psychology shows us that smarter individuals update their beliefs when they're presented with strong new evidence. But when you cling to a heavy stone shield just to protect your fragile ego, you become completely unable to move forward. Holding on to ideas just to win an argument creates this rigid thinking pattern that completely blocks your intellectual growth. But the danger definitely doesn't stop there. Welcome to trap 3, oversimplifying the complex. We all know the real world is multi-layered, right? It is rarely just black and white. But the third sign you might not be as smart as you think is that you actively reduce these incredibly complex, nuanced issues into overly simplistic, absolute answers.
And this brilliantly illustrates the stark difference. On one side, shallow processing aggressively forces a square peg into a round hole, shouting absolutes like always and never. Psychology suggests this kind of absolute thinking is basically just forcing the messy real world into a simplistic shape that simply doesn't fit. But real intelligence? It navigates a varied, nuanced landscape, carefully evaluating different shapes and paths. True intelligence recognizes nuance instead of just destroying it for the sake of an easy answer.
Moving right along, we arrive at trap 4, the death of curiosity. The fourth sign is pretty simple. You just don't ask questions. Curiosity, that simple, humble willingness to ask why and how, is one of the absolute strongest indicators of true cognitive expansion. It is literally the engine of intelligence. Think of people who believe they already know enough. In our visual here, they're standing right at the edge of a cliff, dropping a small stone to measure the vast, unseen depths of knowledge below. Without curiosity, without dropping that stone to see just how deep the rabbit hole goes, the brain actually stops expanding. If you think you already know everything, actually scratch that. If you think you just know enough, you stop learning entirely. The cliff edge is exactly where your intelligence stalls out.
And this brings us to our final psychological sign, trap 5, the blame game. Look, everyone faces external challenges. That's just life, right? But constantly blaming external circumstances or other people for every single failure you experience, that shows a severe, crippling lack of internal self-reflection. And this brings us to a really cool concept called metacognition. It's the ability to analyze your own behavior. Psychology heavily links intelligence with this crucial skill. Notice what happens when our thinker turns that massive magnifying glass away from the outside world and points it directly inward at themselves. That is metacognition in action. The logic is just undeniable. If you never look inward, you can never improve. Blaming others is basically the ultimate shield against self-awareness.
So let's pull all of this together. We've got overconfidence, rigidity, oversimplification, lack of curiosity, and constant blame.
What you really need to take away from this explainer is that these behaviors don't just limit a person's success in life or business, they actively limit the thinking process itself. They're like these invisible walls you build inside your own mind that stop you from seeing the world clearly.
Therefore, based on the psychology we've unpacked today, we really need to completely redefine true intelligence. It's about thinking clearly, adapting to new information, and constantly questioning yourself. It is absolutely not about merely appearing smart to everyone else. It's about maintaining that dynamic cognitive flexibility and a relentless commitment to growth, even when it means saying, hey, I was wrong about that.
Sometimes the biggest sign of low intelligence is not realizing it. Wow, it all comes down to radical honesty. You've got to take that magnifying glass, turn it inward, and ask yourself, are you truly as smart as you think, or are you just refusing to look in the mirror? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep adapting, keep questioning, and I'll see you next time.